Dr. Ko, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. For those of you that don't know Dr. Ko, she received her BA in biology and education from Mount Holyoke College. She then went on to complete her PhD in biomedical sciences at UC San Francisco. She's currently the director of the Human Physiology program in Sargent College and is our gross human anatomy professor. In 2018, she was the recipient of the Metcalf Teaching Award. Metcalf Award is the highest award Boston University bestows on a faculty member for teaching, and Dr. Ko received that in 2018. And fresh off the press, you're some of the first to know besides Liz, Liz's closest family and friends. She just signed a first edition author title of the textbook titled Human Anatomy and Physiology. Congratulations to that. And I want to share with everybody, the first time I met Dr. Ko, or actually spoke with her on the phone. So I was a physical therapist on campus treating patients. I was treating a patient and I got a phone call. Kelly, Dr. Ko's on the phone. I'm like, I think that's the person that took over teaching in biology for Gail Pat. Okay, wonder why she's calling me. So she let me know that one of my advisees had not done as well as she would have hoped on an exam. And she picked up the phone to call me to tell me. At a large university, like, this is the personalized attention that our students are receiving from Dr. Ko. And from that moment forward, I was my life's mission to not only meet her and get to know her, but now I have the privilege of working with her. So Liz, thank you for being here with us tonight. My first question for you, and just so people can kind of get to know you a little bit, how did you become interested in teaching anatomy and teaching in general?
First of all, Kelly, thank you for inviting me. It's super fun to talk to so many of our alums. But yeah, when I was a college student, I knew that I kind of had a passion for studying the human body. Biology was really the only subject I really loved other than kind of reading. And so I pre-med, because everyone said, oh, if you love biology, you love bodies, you want to learn this stuff, you should be pre-med. But I realized that I kind of, sick people are definitely not my thing. Like snot and vomit, like just no, I can't do it at all. And that's kind of par for the course if you want to take care of sick people. So I couldn't figure out what to do, and realized that teaching was really kind of, and so I double majored in education, and I thought I would teach high school. But when I got some exposure, I realized that high school students have a lot of things that they're learning, and not all of them are about the human heart. And so that kind of wasn't my cadence either. So when I went to graduate school, I got as much teaching experience as I could. And I figured out that that was the population of people that I loved to teach, was the college students. And I actually had never taken anatomy before, but as I said, I find all of the opportunities to teach a student. So they asked me able to show up lab gross. They didn't ask me if I knew the spell. They just asked if I could show up and teach, and I said yes. So I walked into a cadaver lab to teach for the first day, having never been in one, having never seen a cadaver, and kind of, did my best, learned it as I went. And I've been teaching anatomy, I think, every year since then. So about 15 years ago.
That's awesome. And we're so blessed to have you. So every single one of us in this call has an amazing memory at Sargent, and you just get this feeling when you walk into the building. So when you applied for the position at Sargent and you walked into the building for your interview, which literally, a few doors down from the College of Arts and Sciences where you came from, what was the feeling that you got when you first came into Sargent?
That's a fantastic question. I will actually never forget it. So when my first kind of 7 years, I think at BU, I was teaching in the biology department, the College of Arts and Sciences. 4 Sargent students. So, and I taught a sequence of classes. So I would have students usually for 3 or 4 consecutive semesters. So I knew these students well, even though there was hundreds of them. I came to know them very well, and you know, kind of considered myself very lucky, because Sargent students have a reputation on campus of, you know, being a little bit more engaged, you know, kind of more curious, and just kind of, you know, ardently in it for passion. So I felt like I had the best job anyway. And so I came across the street for my interview, and, you know, I'm all nerves and in my uncomfortable outfit and everything. And I come out of the stairway, and on the second floor, you know, there's a whole bunch of seating areas where students kind of hang out. And I just, as soon as I walked out, it was like, oh, hey, Dr. Ko. Oh, Dr. Ko, what are you doing over here? Oh, hey, Dr. Ko. And it was all my students, because I had taught almost everybody. And it was such a feeling of coming home, that, you know, the rest of the interview day kind of didn't matter as much, because I felt like this is what students were. And so I was kind of coming back to them.
That's it. And so many students, you know, Dr. Ko's classes are requirements for every undergrad at Sargent. So they all had the pleasure, before she became our director, of getting to, you know, be in the classroom with her and learning from one of the best and brightest in this country. So I'll never forget, I had the fortunate ability to be able to go to Dr. Ko's teaching demonstration. So not only did I get to hear from students how amazing she was, but now I got to watch her. And she gave the most amazing talk on the knee. Did you know when you applied for this position that you would be teaching gross?
I did know that I would need to teach gross. I will tell you that having you in the audience for that teaching demonstration was very intimidating, because you're a PT and I am not. And so it was very intimidating to have to teach to people who know this anatomy very, very well. So it's, I always love when you tell that story, because I feel like, okay, yeah, I passed.
It was the most fun teaching demonstration. And one of the other, there was a doctoral candidate in with us who just defended his thesis this past week. And we had the most wonderful time together. Her lectures are very dynamic and very interactive. And we had a competition together to see who could win Dr. Ko's teaching lecture. So, okay, you are now with us and you have your first semester teaching gross. So when you first came in, so everybody needs to know this is pre-pandemic and we're going to get up to present day. So when you first came in, first time teaching gross, how did you approach the lecture portion? How did you approach the lab portion? Some of us, you know, on this call had the privilege of being educated by Dr. Powers. Some of us had Dr. Shotland. What was your approach?
So that's a fantastic question. And I'll say, before I kind of talk about how I did it, that again, it was a little intimidating, because I had taken over a lot of classes, you know, in various aspects of my teaching career. But this one was such a gem, such a famous course that people have very strong feelings about, taught by kind of powerhouses. And so I kind of had a conflict within myself of, do I teach it as they have taught it, you know, because it's always been this successful, meaningful course to people, or do I teach it my own style, because the way I do things? Which is very different from the kind of the traditional lecture style. And you know, when young professors come and ask me for advice and, you know, say, can I borrow your slides to get me started or whatever, then I always tell them the same thing, which is you can't ever be anything but yourself in the classroom. Teaching is such an intimate profession. You have to represent yourself and show yourself to the students. And so I decided that I would teach gross my way, with some, you know, trepidation, because it had always been this amazing course. But so what I did is I wanted, the course is taught Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's 2 days a week. And so I wanted to harvest out enough time for the students to really practice and work with the material in a supported environment where they feel like they're building a community of learners together. They can go out on a limb, they can gain confidence, and they can really work with the material and learn it well in the supported classroom environment. So on Tuesdays, I would lecture to them. and they would have learning that they needed to do between Tuesday and Thursday. And then on Thursday, we would practice what we'd learned. And so that meant I had to trust them to learn some of the material on their own, and that I had to create opportunities for them to engage together in the classroom. And so that's really the way that I kind of focused the first semester. And the first semester I focused on the lecture while I got to know the lab. I kind of dated the lab and asked all the questions and got exposed to the lab. And then the following semester, I began to turn the lab more into a Dr. Ko style and bring really kind of a lot of modernization to the lab.
So just behind the scenes, and this is something that, you know, as an alum, we never had the opportunity to really learn about what is the behind the scenes preparation for you that goes into every gross lecture.
So there's a ton. I did inherit Dr. Shotland's lecture slides. So I had kind of the model were, but again, the way that was very different from the way that I taught. If any of you had her, she kind of had this list of terms on one side and a blank drawing, and she would spend the time kind of drawing the lines and labeling the diagram while talking over it. And so I had kind of these terms and these drawings, but I didn't have a lot of story. I didn't have a lot of context. And so I really come alive for students. And so I have 15 different texts that I'll pull out and kind of refer to along the way. My teaching is case study dependent. So the days when the students are putting their heads together, they're usually working on some sort of clinical case study. So I work with some of our alums have helped me to pull together some clinical case studies. I, find things on the internet. Some of it's based on my own life or today I was teaching one that's one of my children who had something called nursemaid's elbow. We taught that in class today. So, I try to kind of source these materials and create this kind of stepping stone system of questions. So the students are guided along to the answers and try to bring things back from one lecture to another, but it's a lot of reference material. So I say I probably read for about 4 or 5 hours for every hour of lecture that I'm preparing.
It's amazing. And just, thinking about case studies, we all, for those of us that took gross at Sargent, the material, our anatomy doesn't change. The origin, insertion, nerve supply, blood supply, and action of the latissimus dorsi is never going to change. But it's those case studies that you create and tapping into alums and using personal stories, where students can ask you direct questions about the material to be able to apply it to real life. Because those of us that have taken it, there's certain, you'll never forget the origin, insertion, nerve supply, blood supply, and action. That's important, but you have to be able to obviously apply it. So pre-pandemic, first thing you tackled was lecture, and then you tackled the lab. How did you tackle the lab?
So I spent a lot of time in the lab and spent a lot of time with the TAs. And, we had, I think, 10 or 12 TAs that semester. And it's important to remember that, just like I said, every teacher is kind of their own selves. Every TA presents it differently too. So I kind of would sit on different TAs and see how they presented it. The lecture the lab had a couple of components. There was a vast collection of bone osteology. There's the 2 cadavers that the TAs would draw on the chalkboard, and the students have to kind of copy it over and understand it. And then there's palpations where they learn the surface anatomy.
So how did you, I just want to apologize to everybody. There's some cutting in and out on Zoom, and I just want to acknowledge that and apologize to everybody. It's COVID times, and we're doing the best we can, all being home. And I know there are a few words lost here and there, and I just wanted to acknowledge and apologize for that. We're all home right now. In real times, we would, potentially be in Sargent 101. For those of you that aren't in Boston, this is accessible to everybody now, which we'll take going forward. But it's one of the downfalls to technology. So Liz, with lab, how did you start to incorporate technology?
So there was a couple things that I wanted to do in the lab. When you think about the difference between, say, a humerus sitting on a table and the upper arm in a articulated, all put together body, right? It's hard to kind of draw those connections amongst what's going on between fully disarticulated and separate and in the body itself. So I wanted a kind of a midway station in terms of some of that knowledge. So I purchased a bunch of models of the extremities mostly and the joints so that the students could see, not just the humerus sitting by itself on a table, but also the humerus, articulated with the ulna with the ligaments in place. So they could start to build that understanding of how these things work together and then take that information and then go to the cadaver itself and be able to kind of find everything to try to help them connect the things I wanted to do. And then I really wanted to bring in imagery, especially if there's any doctors on the call, right? You don't spend all of your time looking at one body, but X-rays, CT scans, right? This is a lot of the way that we interact with professions. And so I really wanted to help build their literacy earlier. So I was so fortunate in that the year that I took over Gross, the dean was able to invest in an anatomage table. Full body length computer, it's 6 feet long, and it has 4 digitized, and they have all kinds of pathologies. You can, just like every cadaver, you can trace the story of their lives through the different things that you can see, like C-section scars and a knee replacement and, colon cancer, and all that story is in there. And then it also has 2,000 case studies that are based on images, CT scans, X-rays. There's a gunshot wound, there's a pair of conjoined twins. And so we were able to then build a bunch of curriculum around what was so that the students could really kind of engage with in a much more kind of modern, up-to-date 2020 way or 2021 way. And also we, created a lot of kind of questions and activity around it. So the students didn't just look at this and be like, oh, that's a cool image of conjoined twins, but they're like, well, where are they conjoined? Well, what are the effects of that joining going to be? Which parts of them are separate and which parts are together? How would a surgeon approach this? And so that, and a lot more in the lab.
I remember the first time I hadn't been down to the Gross lab since I had graduated. And when Dr. Koh came, just before Dr. Shotland retired, I went up to her and I said, can I watch you teach? And she just kind of looked at me and she said, you want to come to class? And I said, yes, because I had Dr. Powers and I'd love to see how the class has changed. And then when Dr. Koh came in, I said, can I see the lab? I haven't been down to the lab. I taught in the PT lab, but you never get to go in the Gross lab. And when you showed me that Armitage table, holy smokes. Probably one of the greatest learning tools I have ever seen. Our Sargent students right now are so blessed to have that technology. So here we're going to rewind to a year ago. Where were you when you found out that we were not going to be able to return to campus anymore? And holy smokes, how do you teach Gross remotely?
It's funny, because I'm a program director, so I had a preview that this was kind of coming down the line. It was a possibility. Faculty for what are your course plans? Make sure you every night in case you're not coming back tomorrow. Have you thought about how to give exams? And so when I did find out, it was news to me because I hadn't really thought about my own course yet because I had been spending so much time with other people. But BU shut its campus during the middle of spring break. And I had traveled in the first part of spring break. One of my best friends is a playwright and she was debuting a play in Marin County. So I traveled to California. I had a great couple of days, had barely looked at my email, just like any and so I was actually on the airport shuttle, kind of traveling to the terminal. And I was like, oh, wow, there is a lot of email on my phone. And I got off and stepped inside SFO terminal to go to security. And I realized that the terminal was empty. There was still the people working, but there was no, and I was the only security. And I was like, oh, this is really happening. And then I opened up my phone and realized that indeed the campus was shutting the next day, and back to teaching.
So that must have been a very productive plane ride.
It was. I spent a lot of time
Equipped with Wi-Fi. So how did you notify students? How did you, holy smokes, how did you flip your classroom
So
to be remote and your lab and
yeah. So what happens inside of my own classroom is pretty easy. The lab was really the hardest part. And one of the things that was maybe the most challenging for me was that my TAs are wonderful teachers, but they're not trained in teaching and they don't have like boots on the ground experience. So to flip to a remote model of teaching, as well as moving all the curriculum, was a challenge. And I spent a lot of time just like this with them, especially that first semester. So can I show a couple of slides that kind of
please
illustrate the process? Okay. So if we look at this, everybody can see that?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So that kind of like tells us about what do the students need in order to be successful, right? First, some familiarity with it, and then they just need a lot of exposure. And one of the things that's really beautiful, give them like quizzes or worksheets where they have to get some feedback that, and I really haven't mastered the brachial plexus yet, or whatever it is, so that they have time to learn again before their high stakes assessment or their exam. So I wanted to take all of these components with us. And the other thing is of course, is so very hands-on. So those were some of the things that I was really kind of thinking about when I flipped everything. So there's me and a whole team of TAs. These TAs are under, so they were doing a whole bunch of changing their learning. Everybody was kind of in flux. People were moving across the country. And what I thought about was, okay, well, of teaching, right? We've got the cadaver, we've got the diagrams, we've got the bones, we've got palpations. What I need to do is take my team, my big team, and I need to do zone defense. And so what my TAs was, and they're all Sargent students, some of them are grad or undergrad, they're all really knowledgeable. And so I took the green, it's kind of just said, go and find the internet, comb the internet for high quality material that already exists. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Anatomy is taught all over the place. Find good stuff we can use. And then Claire, you can see Claire in pink. Claire's an undergrad who, I think she's a minor in art or a double major. She's a fantastic artist, and I already knew this about her. So what I did was I asked her to create academy style. If you've ever seen kind of like you're drawing and talking at the same time. So the diagrams that we'd always had on the board in the lab are now these really high quality, beautiful over drawings, videos that she created. And she created them in one go and they will live on forever. I mean, they're perfect. Cayman, you can see Cayman in red is like a showman. He probably a circus ringleader in another life. So I had him lead palpations and he's up on, making all these videos. Nadia, she was just really knowledgeable into the osteology videos. And we slowly built a library of content. So I'm going to show you another. So when we went summer and summer to fall, each one of the semesters looked a little bit different in terms of what we could do. So we kept building our library of things, but we reinvented the course every time. So in the we really had, most of our were these TAs who were, and we had the students learning really independently. But we found that, the students really missed a lot of time with their TAs. So come summer, we had our incoming graduate class for the PT program. They were entirely online. None of these students had before. They were all over the country and they didn't know each other. They didn't know each other, but they next few years being in the same cohort. So one of the things I really wanted to do amongst them was be able to build community even across a screen. And so we used some of what we kind of like retooled it so that the students were spending a lot of time talking to each other in these groups. And those groups are still friends, right? So I see some of them around campus, and now they're on campus and some of them are roommates. These are the people that they, figured out how to find apartments with. They were some of the first people they saw when they eventually did get to BU after that summer. And one of I think the biggest compliment that I've ever gotten about my teaching was that summer cohort who learned entirely online, just as we were learning how to do this online, has been just as successful on all of their exams in the classes they took after gross. Huge to be able to get to them even across the computer screen. And then in fall and spring, we brought some of our students back to campus, but of course, some of them weren't on campus. So in the fall, we have students kind of filtering through the lab, but we could only have half the number of students in the lab room at a time because we had to maintain social distancing. So we cut the time in half. And what we did is we sent the students home with boxes of bones so that they would be able to do all of their osteology. And of course, you can do palpations because you carry your body with you everywhere. And most of them live with somebody else. So they would be involving their younger sisters or their roommates in their palpations too. And they came in just for the things they couldn't do anywhere else, i.e. the cadaver, because hopefully none of our students have cadavers in their dorm room. So we kind of, used just the time that we had in person to do the things we couldn't do anywhere else, and then leveraged all this stuff that we created to be able to meet their needs for the other half. But one of the things, I'm on the provost's kind of reopening board, and we did this huge campus-wide survey with 1,200 pages of responses from students. And one of the things that we heard was after the fall semester, students were really lonely. They missed being. And so for spring, having read just all of these heart-wrenching pages of student loneliness, for spring, what we kind of happened in summer with what happened in fall. And I spent the time that we spent together in the classroom or in the Zoom classroom, I spent really trying to forge community among the students. So they work together, they spend a lot of time talking to each other, again, those kind of stable groups, so that we started to combat some of that loneliness. And I haven't pulled them yet because we're still in that semester, but that was kind of the goal for spring. And this is the boxes of that we had shipped to hand out to the students so that they could bring them home. They arrived huge pallets. Just in each of those boxes is a vertebral column, a hand, I forget, there's a pelvis, the hardest bones that they had, to touch them and feel them. And then I'm like, all right, everybody, pull out your spine. And with my and we're able to kind of make these things happen like we would if we were all in the same room.
That's a student's dream come true. If we wanted to buy our own bones, we could buy our own bones. Liz, let me ask you a question. Are you able to move somewhere with better Wi-Fi connection?
So I probably would have to leave and come back. I have 2 different systems in the house, and so I would have to join the other one. Would you like me to do that?
It's cutting. We're losing like every 15th word.
Okay.
Do you mind?
And come back.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, everyone, we can just, how many here, just a really quick poll while Dr. Ko reconnects in with a better Wi-Fi connection. If we could type in the chat, how many of you took gross at Sargent? Oh, so if you took gross, who was your who taught gross when you took gross? Oh, you had Dr. Power. Okay. Oh, and you had Dr. Anybody with Dr. Schottland? Dr. Powers. Okay, so late 80s was probably Dr. Powers. one of my last fireside chats with Steve Windwer, who is an 85 PT grad. He and I were laughing with, sharing our stories about Dr. Powers. If there's a medial, there's a lateral. And even though we had taken it so many years apart, like that was Dr. Powers' teaching style. And just remembering him drawing the brachial plexus. So for those of you that can see my background, I'm virtually in Sargent 101, which is, I'm sure so many of you too have, great memories. If you were in Sargent and weren't at One University Road, just great memories of being in there and seeing Dr. Powers stand up and draw the brachial plexus. He must have been ambidextrous with both hands. So what were some of your, feel free to type in the chat or, raise your hand. What were some of your favorite memories of Gross? I remember going home to my roommates. I lived at 1019 Comm Ave and I reeked of formaldehyde. And all of my roommates were like, you can't, there was a television show 90210 that was always on after Gross Human Anatomy. And they would ask me to please go in the bathroom and get changed and take a shower. Because I smelled so badly of formaldehyde. So many years. Did take anatomy when I was a PE major. We dissected a cat. So CAS, as most of us remember, was CLA. Liz is back.
I'm here.
Hi, okay. Sorry.
Is that better?
Yes, yeah. Okay, so
yeah, a lot of people learned from dissecting cats, but the spay and neuter programs have been so successful and find enough stray cats. So most of our students and beyond won't have the experience of dissecting a cat.
Well, I remember, so we had a football team when I was here, and one of our linebackers was in dissection with me and I couldn't cut the cat's tail off. And I didn't enjoy dissecting the cat. And I just looked at him very nicely. He's got these gargantuan hands. I'm like, would you please cut my tail off? He very nicely cut the tail off for me. Okay, so getting back to where we are. So we talked a little bit about spring and how spring is going. What is happening this summer?
So I'm taking a break from teaching for the summer. Our colleague, Dr. Roberts, is going to teach because I have to write a book. So she'll be teaching it for this summer. But the students, one of the tricky things about the summer class, there's so many tricky things, but it starts almost directly after graduation because they have to then merge in with the students who have been in our continual program. And so what we figured out was that for many of the students, the time between their graduation date, wherever in the country they're coming from, and the class start date was fewer than 10 days. So they wouldn't be able to quarantine. So even though they'll be traveling to live to Boston and starting their testing cadence on campus, if you guys don't know, we have an amazing testing program at BU that's been keeping us safe. But we had to have the entire classroom be remote because we wouldn't be able to get them all through the quarantine to start. And then it's only 20 sections. So we didn't want to switch modalities halfway through. So thankfully, Dr. Roberts gets to kind of rely on the models that we've created and all the content that we have. I actually have far more now than she can even figure out how to use in her 28 days of instruction. But that'll be as we prepare for a back to almost normal for the fall.
Yeah. So what is your vision going forward? Like based on where it is now, and I know some of your rhythm, obviously was disrupted by having to change so much. What lessons have you learned about teaching through COVID, and what's your vision for the future?
Yeah, I know that's a great question. And I think probably every teacher everywhere from kindergarten on up through medical school is having the same moment right now where we have learned that in-person personalized teaching is so important. And we teachers, again, from, my kids' teachers in elementary school on through everybody that I've talked to as I, do seminars around the country, just misses the connection with their students so much. They misses their faces, misses being able to see when we've lost them, misses seeing the aha moment. So where everyone, I think, I was telling students in my other class today that thinking about going back in the fall is kind of like I've been sitting in my room eating cup of noodles for a year, and now I'm going to a Vegas buffet. Like I can do anything and I can see them, and like a world's my oyster. What am I going to do with it? And so I definitely think that we'll be doing a lot of what we've been doing this spring, which has been so successful, which is having the students work in teams to do case studies, because students love that. It helps them build that community and that connection. But my students today, I've been asking them and having conversations with them, and a lot of them really miss the in-person lectures because they say, I watched the recording, which was great, but then by the time I saw you, I couldn't remember what my questions were. And so they really miss that kind of dynamic, being able to raise their hand in real time. I do think that for a lot of the material, having it recorded really works. So I record my material in only 15-minute little, I call them lecturelets, little videos, because the people who run the TED Talk series did all this research, and they figured out that we can really only pay attention to a storyline for about 15 minutes at a time. And so everything's in these 15-minute chunks. And I think some of them, which are really straightforward, like muscles of the antebrachium, I think that's fine for them to kind of watch and digest on their own. And then they can pause and rewind and take their notes. But there's some things that are just a lot more dynamic, like, since COVID, I've been teaching the anatomy of COVID. What are the anatomical changes that happen with this viral infection? And the students, you can't even get through, the students are asking so many questions. So I think that some of those more engaging lectures I will go back to having in the classroom, and then I'll still use a lot of our classroom time for case studies. But I haven't totally decided on a model yet, so don't go talking to the students.
No, what stays on this webinar is said in this webinar stays in this webinar tonight. And I do have to say, one of our recent grads just got into our OT program. Who'll be taking gross this summer, so I'll make sure not to say anything. And thrilled that she will be taking gross this summer. So in the lab during COVID, so students are in the lab right now, correct?
Yeah. Let's see, Thursday. Yeah, they're in there right now, actually. This minute.
And so how are you keeping them socially distanced in the lab right now? Are you still able to use
Great question.
Hermitage table?
Yep. So as we have kind of all gotten used to, 6 feet is kind of the golden rule for social distancing, which also happens to be the length of a cadaver table. So we have, one student stationed at the feet and one at the head of each of our cadavers. And actually, I thought of when we were coming back was that if you can envision instruction happening in a lab, oftentimes there's one TA and a bunch of students kind of with their heads over, all together, huddled around that they're looking at. And I was like, oh, we can't do that. We can't even have one TA and one student. They'd have to be too close. So what we did is we shot these videos using a GoPro, a head-mounted camera, on the TA, and the TA is like, so here's this nerve and here's this. And then we mounted them on an iPad that lives over the cadaver. So if you're a student, you walk up to the head end of the cadaver and you press play on these dedicated dirty iPads. And they say, all right, well, now find this landmark and trace it down and you'll find this. And so the students can sit there and refresh the video as many times as they need to, and they move to the station at the feet and they get the same thing. And then the anatomage table, also 6 feet. So we've got students at each end, and then we've got our models kind of stationed at 6 feet increments throughout the room.
Wow, it's incredible. I mean, so my office right now, and you probably know this, is literally right above the entrance to Sargent, 4 stories up. And I can hear during non-pandemic times the tours going by. And right now you're standing over the anatomy lab and we have cadavers down there. And I would say, during busy times, there's hundreds of people walking by hearing this. And I know for a lot of us, why so many of us chose Sargent. And just so amazing to hear. I mean, when we were in there with Dr. Powers, Dr. Shotland, there was no technology. My best friend from the program is actually on the call tonight, and she and I were engrossed together, and in open lab, and just watching the prosected cadaver, and just how interactive you've made it. And that is how students really learn best. And we are so blessed and so fortunate to have you as a Sargent faculty member. Um, Writing textbooks and just taking gross to the next level and keeping up with the times. So if nobody else has thanked you, I want to thank you for doing that, because as alums, it's you that makes our education even more valuable, by educating the best and brightest of the future, and making our degrees even more valuable as you provide such high quality education. So thank you.
Well, thank you. But I would also argue with you that I have the world's best job, because every single person has a body and they all want to learn about it. So I already have this entryway into their curiosity. And it's definitely the students that make my job worth having. So I think it's a partnership that works well.
Yeah, we're a lucky breed. We all have this, regardless of when we graduated, we all have this connection. And this is one of the classes that connect all of us together, because it's so unique at Sargent. So I want to open up just the dialogue, the chat, any questions that you might have for Dr. Ko about her teaching background, teaching gross now, lab questions, lecture questions. That one burning question, I totally forgot what the, nerve supply is for the, serratus anterior.
So this is off hours. You don't get to quiz me.
So a question came in about the book that you wrote. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. I don't think I can see.
Oh, so that one
you.
came in. Some of them are being direct messaged. So do you want to talk
do you want to ask
about the anatomy and physiology textbook you just wrote?
Sure. I'm in the middle of writing it. So it is due out in February 2022. So I don't even know how many I've got. I think 6 chapters done so far. So this book is anatomy and physiology combined, which is one of my favorite ways to teach these subjects. And I've been, doing some small projects for publishers for, kind of years. A lot of us do that as professors, but I really, really, really always wanted to write. Earlier in my career, I even thought about being a science writer, for the lay press. It's really something that I love a lot. So last summer I was actually with my kids on vacation, and I had forgotten that this meeting was on my calendar with a publisher. And so I quickly saw it on there in the morning and got a nice email and said, I'm sorry, I'm taking my kids to the lake. We're going swimming. Can we reschedule? And the woman who wrote back to me was an editor for Cengage. And she said, yeah, absolutely. We can schedule whenever you want. I just want to let you know what the meeting's about. We're going to ask you to be our lead author on a new first edition textbook. And I was like, oh, I will take that meeting. So we rescheduled the meeting, and yeah, it's actually been a total dream come true. They want a textbook that's a little different. They want to support instructors in learning how to do active learning in their classrooms. They want, a textbook that from chapter 1 on through helps students to think about their learning. So the first chapter in the textbook is actually how to learn A&P, and take stories from office hours and students that I've had, and sources a lot of knowledge that kind of we've gained along the way. And when they asked me if we could find a author to help me who was really good at writing the types of case studies that I write, I thought, oh, I already have someone. I've been working with one of our graduate students he's been teaching with me for 4 years. He is kind of my own voice in another human. So one of our graduate students is helping to author it. And then just this last week, they asked if I could write study tips, like, oh, here's how to study, here's an acronym for the cranial nerves. And I thought, well, I can do that, but I haven't been a teacher, I haven't been a student for, a long time. How about we hire undergrads? So two of our Sargent undergrads are also authoring for the book. They're writing the study tips. So it's kind of a Sargent product. And we're taking some of the photos from the anatomy lab.
Wow. My cheeks hurt from smiling when I hear you. Yeah. When people say, why BU? Why is BU such an amazing institution? It's just this. What can BU offer that they might not get somewhere else? Here is, a Metcalf Award winning teacher who is allowing her students and getting to know her students so well that they're actually working on a book with her. That's a student's dream come true. And when people say, why BU and why are you proud to be a BU alum? This is why we're proud to be BU alums, because BU hires the best and brightest in their fields. Another question came in about the bones that we also probably coveted and wish we had gotten. How were they funded?
So they were funded. I mean, that's actually a good question because as a professor, I don't have to deal with budgets very often, thank goodness. But they were funded kind of through some initiatives through the dean's office. So he knows where that money came from ultimately. But essentially, I kind of said, I really think that these students are not going to be able to learn some of this stuff if they can't put their hands on it. And he said, okay. So over the summer, we sent the students bones, and a lot of them didn't come back, right? Because we knew those students were moving, and we kind of knew that we asked them if they could return them. But the bones that have been used this year, the students checked out, and then they return them after they complete their final exam. So not only did we build a library of digital resources, but we now have this library of physical bones that will be able to be used as study resources for generations of Sargent students to come.
That's phenomenal. So Christina typed in that a generous donor funded the bones. I'm going to say the olden days, but when I was at Sargent, we would sneak into the PT clinic when it was on the 6th floor and hope that the door was unlocked so we could borrow their bones to study, and hopefully one of the exam room doors was open so we could study in there. But we used to have to sneak around to try to find bones. So the fact that we now, I mean, just when you think about donations, like, oh my gosh, whoever donated those bones, has really enhanced the learning of every student. How do you get new ideas for practical applications of anatomy? And are there still surgeons or other providers who lecture in the course?
There are. We were just talking about that as we the four of us joined the call. Yes, well, we can't have visitors on campus right now because there's a whole kinds of quarantining and testing business. But we have had guest lecturers every semester prior to that. And the guest lecturers are amazing, not only because they can give so much more, real life clinical relevance to the same material, but the students also just marvel at the fact that people left BU and became the people things, right? So they're like, tell me about your job, right? They just love to talk to people who have gone out and, can speak about the things that they love and don't love about their professions. That's something in and of itself that the students really cherish. So absolutely, I love having guest lectures because it's one of the only times when I get to sit in the classroom and listen to someone else. And so be a student for a day too is always such a treat for me. So it's really wonderful when we get to invite someone back to lecture for the course. And then in terms of practical applications for anatomy is a great question. I think I referred to the fact that we taught nursemaid's elbow, which is a dislocation of the radius today. It was funny when I was in my office and got a call from the school nurse that something had happened to my son on the playground. And I'm rushing out of there. My colleague says, don't forget to take notes for the case study. So a lot of the case studies actually come from my life, or my family members are a source of some things. There's every so often I'll go to Dr. Google. I often will ask you, Kelly, or other colleagues. I have worked with some of our alums to create case studies, and especially to check my case studies, since I'm not a clinician. Sometimes I need to know, well, how does this really present? I think earlier on, I don't watch that much TV these days because I'm a little busy, but I used to write some from like Grey's Anatomy and stuff. I would get an idea and I'd go research it. But those are some of the ways.
Yeah, and you were never formally a patient of mine, but Dr. Ko reached out, and I think you were having some anterior tib pain. And I was like, you should write up a case study about yourself. Did you ever do that?
I haven't done it, but you fixed me twice now, actually. I also had flexor carpi radialis tendinitis. So you have definitely been my favorite resource.
Yeah, can you name that patient? Here's the symptoms. Yeah. And that's sometimes the best way to write up case studies is, you never want to see a loved one or a child get hurt, but it's like, okay, take down all the notes because this is a great real life example. Can you speak to any of the pathology regarding COVID, especially in the long haulers?
So Christina, this is a topic near and dear to my heart because my sister is a COVID long hauler. So absolutely, how much time do we have? I've been teaching. One of the things that when you're an instructor is that the students are going to be able to connect with material a lot more if it's relevant for them. So I knew that I wanted to teach about COVID beginning on I think I brought it in for the first time this fall. The summer is too fish. We didn't have time to add any content. So I talk about both the ways that there are some anatomical facets to this pathology that enable COVID to be so severe, right? If we compare, SARS-CoV-2 to other respiratory viruses, we see these really significant outcomes. So I talk a little bit about how the anatomy contributes to the pathogenesis of COVID. And then I talk about how some of these can stay for life. So for example, I won't talk about this forever because we're nearing the end of our time. But the receptor, one of the receptors for SARS-CoV-2 is expressed all over the body, which is why we see this diversity of symptoms. And some of these receptors are expressed on the muscle cells of the heart, cardiomyocytes. And if you know anything about people who have heart attacks, right, the heart muscle itself can't heal well. And so if we have a viral infection in these cardiomyocytes and they die, then that's tissue that's never really going to be able to heal very well. And so that can lead to arrhythmias, especially as most common, or other cardiomyopathies that can stay for the lifespan. This is something that I'm really concerned with in terms of kind of the global scale of how many people are going to be, working with some of these longer symptoms for life. I do think that if we think about long haulers, we can kind of put them into two buckets. So there's individuals, as I just spoke about, who are going to have structural damage from where the virus has been. That's one kind of therapeutic approach, thinking about how to help these individuals for the rest of their lives. And then I think there's another bucket, and this I think is actually really, really interesting. There's another bucket for whom they get an autoimmune reaction that stems from this viral infection. And so that'll be a really different therapy. I actually have a ton of hope for that population of patients, that they'll be treatable. And my PhD is actually in immunology. And so one of the things that I really hope comes from this, every major pandemic in human history has had a huge scientific discovery that came with it, right? In the 1918 flu, we didn't know what caused it because we didn't know what viruses were. 10 years later, we invented the electron microscope so that we could figure out what the causative agent of that was. And now we have discovered viruses. So every pandemic has had major scientific outcomes that came on the other side. And my ardent hope for the other side of this is we really learn a lot about how our immune systems are different. If you talk to 10 friends who've all had the vaccine, right? You're going to, one person, oh, my arm was a little sore. The next person, I was in bed for 4 days, right? Our immune systems are reacting very, very differently, but we don't understand how. And I hope that this is where our science is taking us in the next 10 years, is to really understand our immune systems. So if there is another pandemic, we will understand so much more about the way that our immune systems will handle it.
Yeah, you're getting thumbs up in the background. And Dr. Koh's sister announced in the chat that she's here on the call, which I couldn't be more happy about. And Dr. Koh let us know that her sister received her second dose of the vaccine. And she is in my personal thoughts and prayers that her long hauling symptoms subside as a result of the second vaccine. I will pray every night that you're in that 50%. But I know we're just about out of time. Thank you so much. Just forever grateful for you being a colleague, being a friend now. And I can't wait till the fall when we can see each other live in person. And everybody, thank you so much for joining us here tonight. We will continue our Fireside Chat series again in the fall. I look forward to seeing everybody soon. I hope everybody on this call is well, your loved ones are well. And that you have a wonderful summer. Thanks, Dr. Koh. Thank you, everybody, so much for being here. Good night.